The morning mist hung heavy over the grounds of Ravenscroft Palace as Prince Alexander adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror of his silver Aston Martin. The early dawn light cast long shadows across the ancient stone walls that had housed the royal family for over 4 centuries. Today was different from his usual routine. Today he needed to slip away unnoticed. Alexander had always been the dutiful son, the responsible heir who followed protocol and honored tradition, but lately, the weight of royal expectations had become suffocating. Constant scrutiny, the endless ceremonies, the political marriages being whispered about in the corridors of power, it all felt like a cage closing in around him. He started the engine, its purr barely disturbing the morning quiet. The palace staff wouldn't be stirring for another hour, giving him the perfect window to escape for a few precious hours of freedom. He had discovered a small coastal village called Millbrook, about 30 miles away, where nobody recognized him, and he could simply be Alexander, not Prince Alexander of Valdonia. As he drove through the palace gates, Alexander felt the familiar rush of liberation. The winding country roads stretched before him like ribbons of possibility. He rolled down the windows, letting the fresh morning air fill his lungs. This was what he lived for, these stolen moments of normalcy. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Lady Catherine Blackwood was pacing in her private chambers. Catherine had been Alexander's stepmother for 5 years now, having married his father, King Edmund, after a whirlwind courtship that had scandalized the royal court. At 38, she was only 10 years older than Alexander, a fact that had never sat well with many palace insiders. Catherine had noticed Alexander's recent behavior changes, the late-night drives, the evasive answers when questioned about his whereabouts, the distant look in his eyes during royal functions. As someone who had clawed her way from minor nobility to the throne, she understood the importance of maintaining the royal image. Alexander's mysterious disappearances could become a liability. She had tried speaking with King Edmund about their concerns, but the king was dealing with his own political crisis. The neighboring kingdom of Astoria was pressuring Valdonia for a trade agreement that would benefit them greatly while potentially harming Valdonian farmers. The stress was taking its toll on Edmund's health, and Catherine found herself increasingly responsible for managing palace affairs. That morning, Catherine made a decision that would change everything. She instructed her personal security detail to discreetly follow Alexander during his next outing. She told herself it was for his protection, but deep down she knew it was about control. In the royal family, information was power, and she needed to know what Alexander was hiding. Captain Marcus Sterling, head of Catherine's security team, was an imposing man in his 40s, with steel-grey hair and calculating eyes. He had served in the military before joining the Royal Guard, and was known for his unwavering loyalty to Lady Catherine. When she approached him with her request, he didn't question her motives. 3 days later, Alexander made his usual early morning departure. This time, however, a black SUV followed at a careful distance, maintaining visual contact while staying far enough behind to avoid detection. Captain Sterling personally led the surveillance operation, understanding the delicate nature of the mission. Alexander drove his familiar route toward Millbrook, unaware of the tale. He was thinking about Emma, the young teacher he had met at the village cafe 3 weeks ago. Emma had no idea who he really was. To her, he was simply Alex, a businessman from the capital who enjoyed weekend drives in the countryside. Their conversations had been refreshing, free from the formal language and hidden agendas that characterized most of his interactions at the palace. As Alexander's car wound through the hills approaching Millbrook, Captain Sterling maintained communication with his team. They had sophisticated tracking equipment, but Sterling preferred old-fashioned surveillance techniques. Technology could fail, but trained eyes rarely missed important details. Alexander parked near the harbour and walked toward the small cafe where Emma worked part-time on weekends. The Anchor Inn was a charming establishment with weathered wooden tables and windows overlooking the fishing boats bobbing in the harbour. The smell of fresh coffee and baking bread created a warm, inviting atmosphere that felt worlds away from the formal dining rooms of Ravenscroft Palace. Emma looked up from behind the counter as Alexander entered, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure. She was 26, with auburn hair that caught the morning sunlight and green eyes that sparkled with intelligence and humor. Her simple sundress and casual manner were a stark contrast to the elaborate gowns and calculated composure of the women Alexander usually encountered. They spent the morning walking along the harbour, talking about books, travel dreams, and Emma's work with local children. Alexander found himself sharing stories from his business trips abroad, carefully editing out any royal references. For a few hours, he felt like the person he might have been in a different life. Someone free to make his own choices, to love whom he pleased, to define his own future. Captain Sterling and his team observed from various vantage points, photographing and documenting everything. Sterling noted the obvious affection between Alexander and the unknown woman. He recognized the potential scandal this relationship could create if it became public knowledge. A prince secretly involved with a commoner while marriage negotiations with foreign royalty were ongoing could destabilize important political alliances. As the afternoon wore on, Alexander and Emma found themselves sitting on a quiet stretch of beach, watching the waves roll in. Emma had packed a simple picnic lunch, and they shared sandwiches and local cheese while seagulls circled overhead. Alexander felt more relaxed than he had in months. It was during this peaceful moment that Emma's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and frowned slightly. One of her friends had sent her a link to a news article about Prince Alexander's upcoming diplomatic visit to Astoria. The accompanying photo made Emma's blood run cold. She stared at the phone screen, then at the man sitting beside her, then back at the screen. The resemblance was unmistakable. The formal royal portrait showed the same strong jawline, the same dark hair, the same deep brown eyes that she had been gazing into all morning. Emma's hands began to tremble as the reality of the situation hit her. She had been dating Prince Alexander of Valdonia. The heir to the throne had been lying to her for weeks, allowing her to believe he was just an ordinary businessman. Every moment they had shared suddenly felt tainted by deception. Alexander noticed her change in demeanor immediately. Following her gaze to the phone screen, he felt his stomach drop. The careful facade he had maintained was crumbling, and he could see the hurt and confusion in Emma's eyes. Before he could explain, Emma stood abruptly, gathering her things. Her voice was barely steady as she spoke. "I need to go. I need to think about this." She walked quickly toward the parking area where her small car was parked, leaving Alexander alone on the beach with the weight of his deception settling heavily on his shoulders. Captain Sterling, observing from a distance, immediately understood the significance of what had just occurred. The woman had discovered Alexander's true identity, making her a potential security risk. He quickly radioed his team to begin background checks on Emma while maintaining surveillance on both individuals. Alexander sat alone for another hour, watching the waves and grappling with the consequences of his secret relationship. He had known this moment would come eventually, but he had hoped for more time, perhaps a chance to gradually reveal the truth. Now everything felt rushed and damaged. When Alexander finally returned to his car and began the drive back to Ravenscroft Palace, he was unaware that his stepmother's security team had documented every moment of his day. The photographs and detailed reports would soon be in Catherine's hands, giving her powerful leverage over the future king. Captain Sterling's team had also gathered preliminary information about Emma. She was a primary school teacher, originally from a small farming community 2 hours north of Millbrook. She had no criminal record, no political affiliations, and no apparent connections to foreign governments. On the surface, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed to be, an ordinary young woman living a quiet life. However, Catherine would not be satisfied with surface appearances. She had learned through experience that even the most innocent-seeming individuals could pose threats to royal security. Emma's knowledge of Alexander's secret visits to Millbrook made her dangerous, regardless of her intentions. As Alexander drove through the palace gates that evening, he noticed the increased security presence. Additional guards were stationed at various checkpoints, and the usual casual atmosphere among the staff seemed more tense. He attributed it to his father's ongoing political negotiations and didn't immediately connect it to his own activities. That night, Catherine reviewed Sterling's reports in her private study. The photographs clearly showed Alexander's affection for the unknown woman, and the documentation of their activities painted a picture of a serious relationship rather than a casual acquaintance. Catherine recognized the potential for major scandal. More troubling was the evidence that the woman had discovered Alexander's identity. This meant she possessed information that could be valuable to foreign governments, rival political factions, or media outlets seeking sensational stories about the royal family. Catherine had seen how quickly such situations could spiral out of control. She made another decision that would prove crucial to future events. Catherine instructed Captain Sterling to continue surveillance on both Alexander and Emma, with particular attention to any communications between them. She also ordered comprehensive background investigations into Emma's family, friends, and associates. Catherine understood that knowledge was only powerful if used strategically. She would need to time any revelations carefully to maximize their impact and protect the royal family's interests. The upcoming negotiations with Astoria were too important to risk disruption from a romantic scandal. As the night deepened over Ravenscroft Palace, 3 people lay awake with troubled thoughts. Alexander wrestled with guilt over his deception and worry about Emma's reaction. Emma stared at her ceiling, trying to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. And Catherine planned her next moves in the delicate game of royal politics and personal secrets. None of them could have predicted how quickly events would escalate or how their individual decisions would collide in ways that would challenge the very foundations of the Valdonian monarchy. The peaceful morning that had begun with Alexander's innocent drive to Millbrook had set in motion a chain of events that would test loyalties, expose hidden agendas, and force each of them to confront the true cost of power and love. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through the ancient halls of Ravenscroft Palace and beyond, touching the lives of everyone caught in the web of royal duty and personal desire. The following morning brought unexpected developments that would accelerate the crisis brewing within the palace walls. Emma had spent a sleepless night researching everything she could find about Prince Alexander online. The more she read about his official duties, his charitable work, and his rumored engagement negotiations with Princess Isabella of Astoria, the more betrayed she felt. Emma worked as a substitute teacher at Millbrook Elementary, and her students had always admired her honesty and straightforward nature. The irony of being deceived by someone who had praised those very qualities in her was not lost on her. As she prepared for another day of teaching, Emma made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. She called in sick to work and instead drove to the offices of the Valdonian Herald, a respected newspaper with a reputation for fair reporting on royal affairs. Emma had no intention of selling her story for money, but she felt the public deserved to know about their future king's character, or apparent lack thereof. Meanwhile, at Ravenscroft Palace, Catherine was reviewing the overnight surveillance reports with growing concern. Her security team had detected unusual activity around Emma's cottage, photographers and reporters who seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Someone else was investigating the prince's mysterious girlfriend. Captain Sterling briefed Catherine on the developing situation. Foreign intelligence services, always interested in royal scandals that could affect political stability, had apparently learned about Alexander's relationship through their own surveillance networks. The situation was no longer contained within palace walls. Catherine realized she needed to act quickly before the story broke publicly. She summoned Alexander to her private chambers under the pretense of discussing his upcoming diplomatic responsibilities. When he arrived, she was seated behind her mahogany desk with Sterling's photographs spread before her. Alexander's face went pale as he recognized the images of himself and Emma at the harbor. The careful documentation of their private moments felt like a violation of something sacred. His hands clenched into fists as he struggled to control his anger. Catherine's voice was calm but firm as she explained the situation. The photographs were just the beginning. Her team had evidence of multiple secret meetings, documented his lies to palace security about his whereabouts, and discovered that his girlfriend now knew his true identity. This made Emma a security risk to the entire royal family. Alexander protested that Emma would never deliberately harm the monarchy, but Catherine cut him off with a sharp gesture. In her experience, people's loyalties could shift quickly when faced with pressure, money, or threats. Emma's knowledge of his secret visits made her valuable to enemies of the crown, regardless of her current intentions. The conversation grew heated as Alexander accused Catherine of spying on him and violating his privacy. Catherine responded that his privacy was a luxury the royal family could not afford, especially during sensitive political negotiations with Astoria. King Edmund's health was declining, making Alexander's public image more crucial than ever. What Alexander didn't know was that Catherine had discovered something else during her investigation. Emma's father, Robert Hayes, had recently lost his farm due to debts partially caused by proposed trade policies with Astoria. The same policies that King Edmund was now being pressured to support could destroy the livelihoods of hundreds of farming families like Emma's. This connection made Emma potentially dangerous in ways that went beyond romantic scandal. If she learned about the trade negotiations and connected them to her father's financial ruin, she might have powerful motivations for revenge against the royal family. Catherine had seen how personal grievances could be weaponized against the monarchy. Catherine presented Alexander with an ultimatum. He could end the relationship immediately and publicly, ensuring Emma understood that any future contact would result in serious consequences for both of them. Alternatively, Catherine would be forced to take more direct action to protect the crown's interests. Alexander demanded to know what she meant by direct action, but Catherine remained vague. She had learned that implied threats were often more effective than specific ones, allowing people's imaginations to conjure worse scenarios than she might actually implement. Before Alexander could respond, Urgent knocking interrupted their confrontation. Captain Sterling entered with disturbing news. Emma had been spotted at the Voldonian Herald's offices. If she was meeting with reporters, the scandal could break within hours, potentially derailing the crucial negotiations with Astoria. Catherine's mind raced through possible damage control scenarios. A royal romance scandal during delicate political negotiations could be interpreted as weakness by foreign governments. Astoria's negotiators might see it as leverage to demand more favorable terms, knowing that Valdonia would be eager to distract from domestic embarrassment. She made a rapid decision that surprised both Alexander and Sterling. Instead of attempting to suppress the story, Catherine would try to control its narrative. She instructed Sterling to contact the Herald's editor with an offer exclusive access to a planned royal announcement about Alexander's engagement to Princess Isabella of Astoria. The timing would be crucial. If they could announce Alexander's royal engagement before Emma's story broke, it would frame her as either a delusional fantasist or someone seeking to disrupt a legitimate royal union. Either narrative would diminish her credibility and protect the monarchy's reputation. Alexander was horrified by this plan, insisting he had never agreed to marry Princess Isabella. Catherine reminded him that royal marriages were matters of state, not personal preference. His father had already given preliminary approval for the match, pending the successful conclusion of trade negotiations. The argument escalated, as Alexander realized the full extent of his stepmother's manipulation. She had been planning to force this marriage regardless of his feelings, and his relationship with Emma had simply provided her with the leverage she needed. His secret romance had inadvertently given Catherine the perfect justification for controlling his future. Alexander stormed out of Catherine's chambers, determined to reach Emma before Catherine's plans could be implemented. He needed to warn her about the danger she was in and find a way to protect her from his stepmother's schemes. However, Captain Sterling had anticipated this reaction. Security guards were quietly stationed throughout the palace, with orders to prevent Alexander from leaving the grounds. When he reached the main entrance, he was politely but firmly turned away by guards who claimed to be following standard security protocols. Alexander tried several other exits, only to find them all monitored. He was effectively a prisoner in his own home, cut off from communication with the outside world. Catherine had confiscated his personal phone and blocked his access to palace communication systems. Meanwhile, Emma was sitting across from investigative reporter James Morrison at the Herald's offices. Morrison was an experienced journalist who had covered royal affairs for over a decade. He recognized the potential significance of Emma's story, but was also aware of the ethical complexities involved. Emma described her relationship with Alex and her shock at discovering his true identity. She showed Morrison text messages and photographs from their time together, providing clear evidence of the relationship. However, Morrison was struck by Emma's obvious emotional pain, rather than any desire for revenge or financial gain. As they talked, Morrison began to suspect there was more to the story than a simple romantic deception. Emma mentioned that Alex had asked several detailed questions about her father's farm and the challenges facing rural communities. At the time, she had attributed this to polite conversation, but now she wondered if there had been ulterior motives. Morrison's investigative instincts were triggered. He had been following the trade negotiations with Astoria and knew that agricultural policies were a major sticking point. If Prince Alexander had been secretly gathering information about farming community struggles, it could indicate royal awareness of the human cost of these policies. Emma also revealed something that made Morrison's pulse quicken. During one of their conversations, Alexander had mentioned feeling trapped by expectations and suggested that sometimes doing the right thing required defying authority. At the time, Emma had thought he was talking about business pressures, but now she wondered if he was referring to royal duties. Morrison realized this story could be much bigger than a romance scandal. If Prince Alexander was questioning royal policies and secretly investigating their impact on common people, it could signal a fundamental shift in the monarchy's approach to governance. Alternatively, it could indicate dangerous divisions within the royal family itself. Before Morrison could delve deeper into these possibilities, his assistant burst into the conference room with urgent news. The palace had just announced Prince Alexander's engagement to Princess Isabella of Astoria, effective immediately. The announcement cited the strong bonds of friendship between our kingdoms and emphasized the union's role in promoting mutual prosperity and understanding. Emma felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. The timing of this announcement, just hours after she had approached the media, felt like a deliberate slap in the face. Either Alexander had been planning this engagement all along while pursuing her, or someone was trying to discredit her story before it could be published. Morrison watched Emma's reaction carefully. Her genuine shock and hurt seemed authentic, which made him more inclined to believe her account of the relationship. He had covered enough royal scandals to recognize manufactured emotions, and Emma's pain was clearly real. However, Morrison also understood the legal and practical challenges of proceeding with the story. Publishing allegations about a secret royal romance hours after an official engagement announcement would make the Herald appear opportunistic and potentially vindictive. The timing would undermine Emma's credibility regardless of the truth. Emma asked Morrison what would happen if they published the story anyway. Morrison explained that the palace would likely deny everything, suggest she was confused or seeking attention, and possibly take legal action for defamation. Royal lawyers were notoriously aggressive in protecting the monarchy's reputation. More concerning was the possibility of personal consequences for Emma. Morrison had seen how people who crossed powerful interests could face mysterious difficulties. Job losses, financial pressures, social isolation. The royal family had extensive resources and long memories when it came to protecting their secrets. As Emma grappled with these revelations, she made another discovery that changed everything. While checking her phone for messages from Alexander, she noticed several missed calls from her father. When she called him back, she learned that bank representatives had visited the farm that morning with an unexpected offer. A private investment group was interested in purchasing her father's debt and offering him a generous refinancing package that would allow him to keep the farm. The terms were suspiciously favorable, and the timing seemed too coincidental to be innocent. Someone with significant financial resources was trying to influence her family. Emma realized this was either a genuine attempt to help her father or a sophisticated form of pressure designed to keep her quiet. In either case, it demonstrated that her conversation with Alexander had been taken seriously by people with real power and resources. Morrison listened to Emma's account of the mysterious financial offer with growing concern. He had investigated similar cases where individuals threatening powerful interests had found their families suddenly facing either unexpected opportunities or unforeseen problems. This pattern suggested professional manipulation rather than coincidence. The journalist found himself at a crossroads. Publishing Emma's story could expose important truths about royal behavior and democratic accountability. However, it might also destroy an innocent woman's life and put her family at risk. Morrison had to weigh his professional responsibilities against the human cost of investigative journalism. Emma made the decision for him. After learning about her father's situation, she asked Morrison not to publish the story. She couldn't risk her family's financial security, even if it meant allowing Alexander's deception to go unpunished. Sometimes, she realized, ordinary people couldn't afford to fight powerful institutions. Morrison respected Emma's choice, but suggested they keep the investigation open. If circumstances changed or if additional evidence emerged, they might reconsider publication. He also provided Emma with his contact information and advice about protecting herself from potential retaliation. As Emma left the Herald's offices, she felt a complex mixture of relief and disappointment. She had chosen to protect her family over seeking justice, but the decision left her feeling powerless against the forces that had manipulated her life. The romantic fairy tale she had briefly experienced had transformed into a harsh lesson about the realities of power and privilege. Back at Ravenscroft Palace, Catherine received updates on both Emma's newspaper meeting and the successful intervention regarding her father's farm. The investment group was one of several shell companies controlled by royal financial interests, making it easy to arrange favorable terms without direct palace involvement. Catherine felt satisfied that the immediate crisis had been contained, but she knew the situation remained volatile. Emma's silence had been bought rather than earned, and Alexander's cooperation had been forced rather than freely given. Both represented ongoing security risks that would require careful management. The engagement announcement had served its purpose of deflecting attention from Emma's story, but it had also committed the royal family to a course of action with significant political implications. Catherine needed to ensure that the marriage negotiations proceeded smoothly while managing the domestic consequences of her decisions. Most importantly, Catherine had to deal with Alexander's growing resentment and defiance. His failed attempt to leave the palace that afternoon had demonstrated his willingness to rebel against royal authority. If he continued down this path, he could become a threat to the monarchy's stability regardless of his intentions. As evening fell over Ravenscroft Palace, the ancient stones seemed to hold their breath in anticipation of the confrontations to come. Catherine's victories had been tactical rather than strategic, and the underlying tensions between duty and desire, power and justice, remained unresolved. The royal engagement that was being celebrated in the palace's public rooms masked a web of deception, manipulation and growing resistance that threatened to tear apart the very foundations of the Valdonian monarchy. Alexander's quiet rebellion had been contained for now, but the forces set in motion by his secret relationship with Emma were far from finished with their destructive work. The formal engagement celebration at Ravenscroft Palace 3 days later was a masterpiece of royal pageantry, but beneath the glittering surface, tensions simmered like a volcano ready to erupt. Princess Isabella of Astoria had arrived with great fanfare, accompanied by her own security detail and a diplomatic entourage eager to finalize the trade agreements that would benefit their kingdom immensely. Princess Isabella was everything a royal bride should be: elegant, educated, and politically astute. At 24, she possessed the poise of someone trained from birth for public life. Her auburn hair was always perfectly styled. Her designer gowns flattered her tall, graceful figure, and her conversations demonstrated both intelligence and careful diplomatic training. Yet despite her obvious qualifications, Alexander felt nothing when he looked at her except a growing sense of imprisonment. The engagement party drew nobility from across Europe, creating a dazzling display of wealth and power in the palace's grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across marble floors where couples danced to a full orchestra. The guest list read like a directory of European aristocracy, each name representing political alliances that had taken decades to cultivate. Alexander moved through the crowd like a man in a dream, accepting congratulations and making polite conversation, while his thoughts remained fixed on Emma. He wondered if she was watching the news coverage, seeing him smile beside Isabella while knowing the truth about his feelings. The weight of the charade was becoming unbearable. Catherine, resplendent in emerald silk that matched the royal family's ceremonial jewels, played the perfect hostess. She moved seamlessly between conversations with foreign dignitaries, ensuring that everyone felt welcomed, while carefully steering discussions toward topics that would advance Valdonian interests. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes constantly scanned the room for potential problems. King Edmund appeared frailer than usual despite his formal evening wear and ceremonial decorations. The stress of recent weeks had taken a visible toll on his health, and Catherine noticed him frequently touching his chest as though experiencing discomfort. She made mental notes to arrange for discreet medical consultations once the diplomatic circus concluded. The evening's carefully orchestrated schedule included formal toasts, a blessing from the royal chaplain, and presentations of engagement gifts from various noble houses. Each element had been designed to reinforce the legitimacy and political importance of the union while creating photo opportunities that would dominate tomorrow's headlines. However, Alexander's behavior was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. During the formal toasts, his responses lacked the enthusiasm expected from an eager bridegroom. When asked about wedding plans by enthusiastic guests, his answers were vague and unemotional. Several experienced courtiers noticed his distant demeanor and began whispering among themselves. Princess Isabella was diplomatic, but privately concerned about her fiancé's obvious reluctance. She had been educated about the political necessities of royal marriages and accepted that love was a luxury few monarchs could afford. However, she had hoped for at least mutual respect and compatibility with her future husband. During a brief private moment in the library, Isabella confronted Alexander about his apparent discomfort with their engagement. Her directness surprised him. Most royal conversations were layered with diplomatic language and hidden meanings. Isabella's straightforward approach reminded him uncomfortably of Emma's honest communication style. Alexander attempted to reassure Isabella that his reserve was simply nervousness about the responsibility of marriage and future kingship. Isabella listened carefully but remained unconvinced. She had observed enough royal relationships to recognize the difference between pre-wedding nerves and fundamental reluctance. Isabella made an unexpected suggestion that caught Alexander off guard. She proposed they spend time getting to know each other genuinely, away from the formal protocols and political pressures that surrounded their engagement. Perhaps friendship could develop into something deeper if given the chance to grow naturally. Alexander agreed to Isabella's proposal, partly from courtesy and partly from guilt over his obvious lack of enthusiasm. He recognized that she was an innocent victim of political arrangements beyond her control, just as he was. If he could not have the marriage he wanted, perhaps he could at least build a respectful partnership with his intended bride. Meanwhile, in her cottage near Millbrook, Emma was indeed watching the engagement coverage on television. The images of Alexander smiling beside Princess Isabella while wearing formal evening dress created a surreal contrast to her memories of quiet walks along the harbour. The man on her television screen seemed like a stranger despite their intimate conversations just days earlier. Emma's father had accepted the mysterious refinancing offer, saving the family farm from foreclosure. However, the unexpected financial rescue left Emma with mixed feelings. She was grateful that her family's home was secure, but suspicious about the timing and generosity of the assistance. Nothing in her experience suggested that banks suddenly became charitable towards struggling farmers. Her phone had remained silent since that devastating afternoon at the beach. Alexander had made no attempt to contact her, either to explain his deception or to say goodbye. Emma tried to convince herself that his silence was a relief, but she couldn't entirely suppress her disappointment and hurt. Emma's sister Sarah arrived unexpectedly that evening, ostensibly to celebrate their father's improved financial situation, but actually to check on Emma's emotional state. Sarah had seen news coverage of the royal engagement and suspected the timing was significant given Emma's recent secretive behavior and obvious distress. Without revealing Alexander's identity, Emma described her relationship with someone who had fundamentally deceived her about his background and intentions. Sarah listened sympathetically while noting details that didn't quite fit together. Emma's description of Alex's expensive car, sophisticated knowledge of international affairs, and evasive answers about his work suggested someone far more important than a typical businessman. Sarah, who worked as a paralegal in the capital, had developed sharp instincts about when people were hiding significant information. She gently probed Emma's story, encouraging her sister to consider whether there might be more to the situation than simple romantic deception. Sarah suspected that Emma had become involved with someone whose identity would shock her if she knew the truth. Back at Ravenscroft Palace, the engagement celebration continued late into the night. Foreign dignitaries used the social atmosphere to advance their own political agendas, while members of the royal court jockeyed for position and influence. Catherine navigated these complex currents with practiced skill, but she remained alert for signs of brewing problems. Captain Sterling reported that his surveillance teams had detected unusual activity around the palace perimeter. Photographers and reporters were gathering in larger numbers than typically associated with routine royal events. Intelligence suggested that rumors about Alexander's secret relationship were beginning to circulate despite their efforts at containment. Catherine realized that suppressing the story completely might prove impossible. Instead, she began developing contingency plans for managing the narrative if Emma's relationship with Alexander became public knowledge. The key would be framing any revelations in ways that minimized damage to the monarchy, while maximizing sympathy for the royal family. Late that night, after the last guests had departed, Alexander finally had an opportunity to speak privately with his father. King Edmund appeared exhausted, but Alexander felt compelled to address the situation before it spiraled further out of control. He requested a private audience in the king's study, away from Catherine's influence and the constant observation of palace staff. King Edmund listened quietly as Alexander confessed his relationship with Emma and his reluctance to proceed with the arranged marriage to Isabella. Alexander emphasized Emma's good character and expressed his belief that royal marriages should involve some degree of genuine affection, even if political considerations remained paramount. The king's response surprised Alexander with its gentleness and understanding. Edmund revealed that his own first marriage, to Alexander's mother, had been arranged for political reasons, but had eventually developed into genuine love and partnership. He acknowledged that such relationships required patience and compromise from both parties. However, King Edmund also explained the harsh realities of their current political situation. The negotiations with Astoria were crucial for Valdonia's economic stability, and any disruption to the royal marriage could jeopardize agreements that would affect thousands of citizens. Personal happiness, while important, could not take precedence over national welfare. Edmund shared something that shocked Alexander. He had also fallen in love with someone inappropriate during his youth. A commoner named Margaret, who had worked in the palace kitchens, had captured his heart completely. However, duty had required him to abandon that relationship and marry for political reasons. The personal cost had been significant, but he had never regretted choosing his country's needs over his own desires. Alexander listened with growing understanding of his father's perspective, but also with increasing resentment toward the system that required such sacrifices. He asked whether royal duty always had to come at the expense of personal fulfillment, whether there was any way to balance individual happiness with public responsibility. King Edmund admitted that royal life often involved impossible choices between competing loyalties. However, he suggested that Alexander's relationship with Emma might not be entirely over, even if marriage was impossible. Royal history included many examples of monarchs who maintained meaningful friendships with people they could not marry, relationships that enriched their lives without compromising their political obligations. Alexander found little comfort in his father's suggestion that he might continue a secret relationship with Emma while married to Isabella. Such an arrangement would be unfair to all parties involved and would create ongoing security risks for the monarchy. He wanted either a genuine marriage or none at all, not a lifetime of deception and compartmentalized affections. The conversation concluded without resolution, but with a better understanding between father and son. Edmund promised to consider whether any alternatives to the current arrangement might be possible, while Alexander agreed to fulfill his immediate obligations while they explored options. Both men understood that time was limited. Political pressures would soon make any changes impossible. The next morning brought news that confirmed Catherine's fears about growing media interest. A tabloid newspaper had published speculation about Prince Alexander's mystery woman, complete with blurry photographs that appeared to show him with an unidentified female companion. The story lacked concrete details, but suggested that the royal engagement might not tell the complete story. Catherine convened an emergency meeting with her communications team to develop responses to the emerging story. Their strategy involved neither confirming nor denying the allegations, while emphasizing Alexander's commitment to his royal duties and his happiness with the engagement to Princess Isabella. However, Captain Sterling reported more troubling intelligence. His sources suggested that someone with access to detailed information about Alexander's activities was shopping the story to multiple media outlets. The level of specific knowledge being offered indicated either a security breach within the palace or cooperation from someone directly involved in the situation. Catherine's first suspicion fell on Emma, despite the teacher's apparent agreement to remain silent. However, Sterling's investigation revealed that Emma had maintained a low profile since her meeting with the Herald reporter. If she was selling information to the media, she was doing so through intermediaries that his team hadn't yet identified. A more disturbing possibility emerged during their investigation. Several foreign intelligence services had intensified their surveillance of the royal family during the engagement period, seeking information that could be used to influence the trade negotiations. If one of these services had discovered Alexander's relationship with Emma, they might be using media leaks to create diplomatic pressure. Catherine realized that the situation was evolving beyond her ability to control, through conventional palace security measures. External forces with their own agendas were now involved, making the crisis unpredictable and potentially dangerous. The royal family's private drama was becoming entangled with international political maneuvering in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. Princess Isabella, meanwhile, had begun her own discreet investigation into her fiancé's background and recent behavior. Royal training had taught her to gather intelligence about potential allies and adversaries, and she recognized that understanding Alexander's motivations was crucial for their future relationship. Isabella's inquiries revealed the existence of rumors about Alexander's secret activities, though she couldn't immediately confirm specific details. Her diplomatic experience suggested that successful marriages, even arranged ones, required honest communication about expectations and boundaries. She decided to address the situation directly with Alexander before their relationship became more complicated. That afternoon, Isabella requested a private meeting with Alexander in the palace gardens, away from the formal atmosphere of their previous conversations. She confronted him about the media speculation and asked directly whether he was involved with someone else during their engagement period. Alexander was struck by Isabella's diplomatic but firm approach. Her question forced him to choose between continued deception and potentially damaging honesty. After a long moment of consideration, he decided that Isabella deserved the truth about his feelings, even if he couldn't share specific details about Emma. Alexander admitted that he had developed feelings for someone else before their engagement was arranged, and that these feelings made their upcoming marriage difficult for him to embrace enthusiastically. He emphasized that his reluctance was not personal criticism of Isabella, whom he respected and admired, but rather a reflection of his own emotional conflicts. Isabella appreciated Alexander's honesty but also recognized the serious implications of his confession. A royal marriage based on fundamental emotional dishonesty was unlikely to succeed politically or personally. She asked whether Alexander believed his feelings for this other person could be overcome with time or whether they represented a permanent obstacle to their union. Alexander's inability to answer Isabella's question decisively convinced her that their engagement faced serious challenges that went beyond normal pre-wedding adjustments. She realized that proceeding with the marriage under these circumstances could create long-term problems for both their kingdoms, regardless of the immediate political benefits. Isabella made a surprising decision that would add another layer of complexity to the unfolding crisis. Instead of demanding that Alexander resolve his emotional conflicts privately, she proposed that they work together to find a solution that would satisfy both their personal needs and their political obligations. Her suggestion opened possibilities that neither Catherine nor King Edmund had considered, but it also introduced new uncertainties into an already volatile situation. As evening approached, the various players in the royal drama found themselves facing choices that would determine not only their own futures, but the stability of the Valdonian monarchy itself. Alexander's secret relationship had sparked a chain reaction of consequences that now involved international diplomacy, media scrutiny, and family loyalties in ways that no one had anticipated when he first drove toward Millbrook in search of simple human connection. The crisis reached a critical turning point when Emma received an unexpected visitor at her cottage 3 days after the royal engagement party. Detective Inspector Sarah Collins from the Royal Protection Unit arrived in an unmarked car, her professional demeanor immediately putting Emma on edge. Collins was a seasoned investigator with 15 years of experience protecting the royal family, and her presence signaled that the situation had escalated beyond simple romantic complications. Detective Collins explained that Emma's safety had become a concern due to increased surveillance activity around her home and workplace. Foreign intelligence operatives, paparazzi, and other unknown individuals had been observed monitoring her movements, suggesting that her connection to Prince Alexander was more widely known than previously believed. Emma felt a chill of fear as she realized the implications of Collins' warning. Her quiet life in Millbrook was being invaded by forces she didn't understand, and her family could be at risk because of her relationship with Alexander. The romantic fairy tale that had already turned into painful deception was now becoming a genuine threat to her security. Collins offered Emma a choice that would change her life forever. The Royal Protection Unit could provide her with a new identity and relocation to a different country, ensuring her safety but requiring her to abandon everything familiar. Alternatively, she could accept protective surveillance while remaining in Millbrook, though this would mean living under constant scrutiny and potential danger. The detective also revealed information that shocked Emma to her core. Her father's mysterious financial assistance hadn't come from a private investment group as they had believed. Instead, it had been arranged through shell companies controlled by hostile foreign governments seeking to establish leverage over the royal family. Emma's family had unknowingly become pawns in an international intelligence operation. Emma felt sick as she realized how completely she had been manipulated. Not only had Alexander deceived her about his identity, but their relationship had made her entire family vulnerable to exploitation by foreign agents. The romantic connection that had brought such joy to her life had become a source of danger for everyone she loved. Detective Collins explained that intelligence services from 3 different countries were now interested in Emma's story. They saw her as either a potential asset who could provide ongoing information about royal activities, or as a liability who needed to be silenced to protect their own operations within Valdonia. Meanwhile, at Ravenscroft Palace, Catherine was dealing with her own crisis, as King Edmund's health took a dramatic turn for the worse. The stress of recent political negotiations combined with the family drama had triggered a mild heart attack that left him hospitalized under strict medical supervision. Edmund's condition added urgency to all the unresolved issues surrounding Alexander's engagement and the trade negotiations with Astoria. If the king's health continued to decline, Alexander might need to assume royal responsibilities sooner than anyone had anticipated, making his personal stability crucial for national governance. Catherine found herself facing the possibility of serving as regent if Edmund became incapacitated, while simultaneously managing the growing scandal around Alexander's secret relationship. The delicate balance of power within the royal family was shifting, and she needed to consolidate her position before events spiraled beyond her control. Princess Isabella received word of the king's health crisis while attending a cultural exhibition in the capital. Her diplomatic training had taught her to recognize political opportunities within personal tragedies, and she understood that Edmund's condition might provide her with leverage to renegotiate the terms of her engagement to Alexander. Isabella requested an immediate private meeting with Alexander to discuss how the changing circumstances might affect their relationship. She had spent the previous days researching Valdonian constitutional law and discovered provisions that could allow for modified royal marriage arrangements under extraordinary circumstances. When they met in the hospital's private family room, Isabella surprised Alexander by expressing genuine concern for his father's health, while also acknowledging that Edmund's condition created new possibilities for their personal situation. She suggested that a temporary postponement of their wedding might be appropriate given the family crisis, buying them time to develop a more sustainable arrangement. Alexander was grateful for Isabella's understanding, but also suspicious of her motives. Royal politics had taught him to question generous gestures, especially when they came from foreign princesses with their own political agendas. He wondered whether Isabella was genuinely trying to help or positioning herself for some advantage he hadn't yet recognized. Isabella's next proposal shocked Alexander even more than her earlier suggestions. She revealed that Astoria's intelligence service had discovered information about his relationship with Emma, and that this knowledge was being used to pressure her own government for more favorable trade terms. The personal scandal had become a diplomatic weapon that threatened both their kingdoms' interests. However, Isabella also offered a potential solution that could neutralize the foreign pressure while protecting everyone involved. If Alexander and Emma were to make a public appearance together, acknowledging their relationship but emphasizing its end, it would remove the secrecy that made the situation valuable to hostile intelligence services. Alexander was horrified by Isabella's suggestion that he publicly expose Emma to media scrutiny and potential danger. The idea of using her as a prop in royal political theatre violated everything he felt about protecting the people he cared about. He rejected the proposal immediately, despite Isabella's arguments about its strategic benefits. The argument between Alexander and Isabella was interrupted by urgent news from Detective Collins. Emma had been approached by representatives from a foreign news organization, offering substantial money for exclusive details about her relationship with Prince Alexander. The offer came with implicit threats about what might happen if she refused to cooperate. Collins reported that Emma had declined the offer, but that her refusal had triggered increased surveillance and pressure tactics. Unknown individuals had been seen around her family's farm, her workplace, and her sister's apartment in the capital. The situation was escalating beyond what local law enforcement could handle safely. Catherine, monitoring the crisis from Edmund's hospital room, realized that the situation had moved beyond damage control into active threat management. Foreign governments were now using Emma as a weapon against the Valdonian royal family, making her both a victim and an unwitting participant in international espionage activities. Catherine made a decision that demonstrated both her ruthlessness and her understanding of political realities. She authorized Captain Sterling to implement Protocol 7, a rarely used emergency procedure that allowed the Royal Protection Unit to take extraordinary measures to protect national security. Under Protocol 7, Emma would be taken into protective custody regardless of her personal wishes. Her family would be relocated to secure locations, and all information about Alexander's relationship would be classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. The personal drama would disappear behind a wall of national security protocols that few people had the authority to challenge. Alexander learned about Catherine's decision when Sterling's team arrived at the hospital to brief him on the implementation of Protocol 7. He was appalled by his stepmother's willingness to destroy Emma's life to protect the monarchy's reputation and political position. The conversation that followed would fundamentally alter the power dynamics within the royal family. Alexander demanded that Catherine cancel Protocol 7 immediately, arguing that Emma had done nothing to deserve imprisonment for the crime of falling in love with him. Catherine responded that Emma's innocence was irrelevant when weighed against potential damage to national security and international relations. The argument escalated when Alexander threatened to publicly renounce his claim to the throne if Catherine proceeded with Protocol 7. Catherine countered that his abdication would create a constitutional crisis that could destabilize the government while Edmund was incapacitated, potentially causing far more harm than any romantic scandal. King Edmund, despite his weakened condition, intervened in the conflict between his son and wife. From his hospital bed, he demonstrated the wisdom and authority that had made him an effective monarch for over 2 decades. Edmund proposed a solution that neither Alexander nor Catherine had considered, but that addressed everyone's fundamental concerns. Edmund suggested that Alexander could abdicate his position as heir apparent while remaining a member of the royal family with modified responsibilities. His younger brother Prince Marcus, currently third in line for the throne, could be elevated to heir apparent after appropriate preparation and training. This arrangement would allow Alexander to pursue a private life with Emma while protecting the monarchy from scandal and constitutional crisis. Marcus had always shown strong dedication to royal duties and would likely welcome the increased responsibility and status that came with being the direct heir. However, Edmund's proposal also came with strict conditions. Alexander's abdication would need to be permanent and irrevocable, meaning he could never reclaim his position regardless of changing circumstances. He would also need to accept reduced financial support and a lower public profile that would minimize ongoing media attention. Catherine objected to Edmund's proposal on multiple grounds. Elevating Marcus to heir apparent would require extensive diplomatic renegotiation, as many of the international agreements under discussion had been predicated on Alexander's eventual succession. Additionally, Marcus lacked Alexander's educational background and international experience, potentially weakening Valdonia's diplomatic position. More troubling from Catherine's perspective was the precedent that Alexander's abdication would establish. If royal family members could abandon their duties whenever they conflicted with personal desires, it could undermine the entire concept of hereditary monarchy and dynastic obligation. Alexander found himself torn between relief at the possibility of freedom and guilt over abandoning responsibilities he had been trained to fulfill since childhood. The weight of royal duty had been a burden, but it had also provided structure and meaning to his life. Without those obligations, he wasn't sure who he would be or what he would do. Princess Isabella observed these family dynamics with the calculating eye of an experienced diplomat. She recognized that the proposed changes could affect Astoria's negotiating position and her own future role in diplomatic relations between the kingdoms. Isabella needed to protect her country's interests while navigating the personal relationships that had become entangled with state politics. Isabella requested a private meeting with King Edmund to discuss how Alexander's potential abdication might affect the trade agreements and diplomatic initiatives that both kingdoms needed to conclude successfully. She emphasized that Astoria's government had invested significant political capital in the royal marriage and would face domestic criticism if the engagement was dissolved without adequate compensation. Edmund appreciated Isabella's straightforward approach to the political implications of the family crisis. Her willingness to address practical concerns rather than simply expressing outrage or disappointment suggested that she possessed the diplomatic maturity needed for successful international relations. The king proposed that Isabella might consider a modified arrangement with Prince Marcus if Alexander chose to abdicate. Marcus was younger and less experienced than Alexander, but he was also more malleable and potentially more enthusiastic about the political dimensions of royal marriage. Isabella agreed to consider Edmund's suggestion, while noting that any new arrangement would require careful evaluation by Astoria's government and extensive renegotiation of existing agreements. The diplomatic processes involved could take months to complete, during which time the current crisis would need to be managed carefully to avoid disrupting relationships between the kingdoms. Meanwhile, Emma was facing her own impossible choice, as Detective Collins pressed her for a decision about protective custody versus relocation. Emma's sister Sarah had driven from the capital to provide moral support, but her presence also reminded Emma of how many people could be affected by her decision. Emma's father, grateful for his farm's financial rescue but suspicious about its timing, urged his daughter to prioritize her safety over any loyalty she might feel toward the mysterious man who had deceived her. He couldn't understand why someone he had never met was creating such complex problems for his family. Sarah, with her legal training, advised Emma to seek independent counsel before making any decisions about protective custody or relocation. She suspected that the authorities were not providing complete information about Emma's options or the long-term implications of various choices. Emma realized that her decision would be final and irrevocable, just like Alexander's choice about abdication. Whatever path she chose would determine not only her own future, but the lives of everyone she loved. The romantic relationship that had begun with such promise had become a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. As evening approached, all the major players in the unfolding drama found themselves facing decisions that would reshape the Valdonian monarchy and determine the personal futures of everyone involved. The stakes had grown beyond individual happiness or even family loyalty to encompass questions of national security, international diplomacy, and the fundamental nature of royal obligation in the modern world. The choices made in the next few hours would echo through generations of Valdonian history, determining not only who would inherit the throne, but what kind of monarchy the country would become. The personal had become political, and the political had become personal, in ways that none of the participants had anticipated when Alexander first drove through the palace gates in search of a few hours of freedom. The final confrontation began at dawn when Emma made her decision about Detective Collins' ultimatum. Instead of accepting protective custody or relocation, she chose a third option that surprised everyone involved in the crisis. Emma decided to drive to Ravenscroft Palace and confront Prince Alexander directly, demanding answers and closure before allowing her life to be further disrupted by royal politics. Emma's decision horrified Detective Collins, who explained that approaching the palace without authorization during a national security crisis could result in her arrest or worse. The heightened security protocols around the royal family meant that unauthorized visitors were treated as potential threats, regardless of their previous relationships with family members. However, Emma had reached her limit of being manipulated and controlled by forces beyond her understanding. Her quiet life had been shattered by deception, her family had been threatened by foreign agents, and now government officials were demanding that she disappear entirely to protect people who had never shown any concern for her welfare. Emma's sister Sarah offered to accompany her to the palace, both for moral support and to provide legal representation if Emma was arrested. Sarah had researched royal protocols during the night and believed that Emma had the right to request a formal audience with Prince Alexander, even if that request might be denied. The drive to Ravenscroft Palace took place under heavy surveillance as Detective Collins reluctantly followed Emma's car while coordinating with palace security about the potential security breach. Collins understood Emma's emotional motivations but feared that the confrontation could trigger Protocol 7 automatically, removing any remaining flexibility in how the situation was resolved. At the palace, Catherine was awakened by urgent reports about Emma's approach. After a sleepless night planning damage control strategies, Catherine was in no mood for dramatic gestures from the teacher whose relationship with Alexander had created the entire crisis. She immediately ordered the palace gates sealed and instructed security to arrest Emma if she attempted to enter the grounds. However, Alexander had also been informed about Emma's approach, and he made his own dramatic decision that caught everyone off guard. Before Catherine could implement her security measures, Alexander walked out of the palace's main entrance and met Emma at the outer gates, placing himself between her and the security guards who had been ordered to arrest her. The confrontation that followed would be remembered as one of the most significant moments in Valdonian royal history. With palace guards, security officials, media representatives, and international observers all watching, Alexander and Emma faced each other across the symbolic boundary between royal privilege and ordinary citizenship. Emma's first words were not accusations or pleas, but a simple question that cut through all the political complexity surrounding their relationship. She asked Alexander whether anything about their time together had been genuine, or whether she had been merely an object of study for a prince seeking to understand his future subjects' lives. Alexander's response was equally direct and more revealing than anyone expected. He admitted that his initial visits to Millbrook had been partly motivated by curiosity about life outside the palace, but emphasized that his feelings for Emma had been completely real and unexpected. He had never intended to deceive her about his identity, but had been afraid that revealing the truth would end their relationship immediately. Catherine, watching from the palace steps, realized that Alexander's public confession was creating exactly the kind of scandal she had worked desperately to prevent. Media cameras were capturing every word of the exchange, and the footage would be broadcast worldwide within hours, potentially destroying years of careful diplomatic negotiations. Emma listened to Alexander's explanation with visible pain, but also with the strength that came from finally understanding the full scope of what had happened to her life. She told Alexander that she could have accepted his royal identity and the impossibility of their relationship, but that the deception and manipulation that followed had violated her trust in ways that couldn't be repaired. Alexander's response shocked everyone listening, including Catherine, the security officials, and Emma herself. He publicly renounced his claim to the Valdonian throne, declaring that he could no longer serve a system that required him to choose between duty and basic human honesty. His abdication was immediate and irrevocable, spoken before witnesses who could never allow him to reclaim the position. The silence that followed Alexander's abdication was broken by Catherine's urgent orders for security, to separate Alexander and Emma before the situation escalated further. However, King Edmund's arrival in a wheelchair pushed by medical staff prevented any immediate intervention. Despite his weakened condition, the king's presence commanded absolute authority over the palace grounds. Edmund asked to speak privately with both Alexander and Emma, away from the media cameras and security surveillance. His request created a logistical nightmare for Catherine and the security teams, but royal protocol prevented them from refusing the king's direct orders even under these extraordinary circumstances. The private meeting took place in the palace's ancient chapel, a space that had witnessed royal births, marriages, deaths, and abdications for over 4 centuries. The setting emphasized the historical significance of the moment, while providing the spiritual atmosphere that Edmund felt was appropriate for such momentous decisions. King Edmund's conversation with Alexander and Emma revealed depths of wisdom and understanding that surprised both young people. The king admitted that his own marriage to Alexander's mother had survived similar challenges early in their relationship, and that royal love affairs had always created tension between personal happiness and political necessity. However, Edmund also shared insights about duty and sacrifice that helped Alexander understand the broader implications of his decision. The king explained that abdication was not just a personal choice, but a political act that would affect thousands of people who depended on stable royal leadership for their security and prosperity. Edmund asked Emma directly whether she was prepared for the lifelong consequences of loving someone who had chosen to abandon royal privilege for personal happiness. The king explained that Alexander's abdication would make him a private citizen, but also a permanent exile from the world of power and influence that had shaped his entire identity. Emma's response demonstrated the wisdom and strength that had attracted Alexander to her originally. She told King Edmund that she had never sought to marry a prince or join the royal family, and that Alexander's willingness to sacrifice everything for their relationship actually made her question whether such love was healthy for either of them. Emma's honesty about her concerns surprised Alexander and forced him to confront questions he had avoided during his dramatic gesture of abdication. She asked whether he truly understood what it meant to live as an ordinary citizen, whether he could find fulfillment without the sense of purpose that royal duty had provided throughout his life. The conversation continued for over an hour, as Edmund helped both Alexander and Emma explore the practical and emotional implications of the choices they were making. The king's questions forced them to consider not only their feelings for each other, but their individual needs for meaning, security, and personal growth. Meanwhile, outside the chapel, Catherine was managing a crisis that had spiraled beyond anyone's ability to control through conventional damage management. International media was broadcasting live coverage of the royal drama. Foreign governments were demanding explanations about how the crisis might affect existing agreements, and Princess Isabella was requesting immediate consultation about her own position in the evolving situation. Catherine realized that regardless of what happened between Alexander and Emma, the monarchy would need to adapt to new realities created by the public abdication and the international attention it had generated. The old methods of managing royal scandals through secrecy and manipulation were no longer viable in the age of global media and instant communication. Princess Isabella's response to the crisis demonstrated both diplomatic skill and personal grace that impressed even Catherine. Instead of demanding compensation for the embarrassment of her cancelled engagement, Isabella offered to help manage the international diplomatic consequences of Alexander's abdication in ways that would minimize damage to both kingdoms. Isabella suggested that Alexander's decision could be framed as a demonstration of Valdonian democratic values and personal freedom, potentially enhancing the kingdom's reputation for progressive monarchy rather than damaging it. Her proposal required careful coordination between Valdonian and Asturian diplomatic services, but offered a path forward that could benefit both countries. The arrival of Prince Marcus at the palace during the afternoon added another crucial element to the developing resolution. Marcus had been briefed about the situation during his flight from his diplomatic posting in Geneva, and his response demonstrated the leadership qualities that had previously been overshadowed by Alexander's position as heir apparent. Marcus publicly supported his brother's right to choose personal happiness over inherited obligation, while simultaneously accepting the responsibilities that Alexander's abdication had transferred to him. His statement balanced family loyalty with political necessity in ways that began to restore stability to the royal crisis. The resolution came when King Edmund emerged from the chapel with Alexander and Emma to address the assembled media, government officials, and palace staff. Edmund's statement was brief but comprehensive, acknowledging the personal nature of recent events while emphasizing the monarchy's commitment to serving Valdonian citizens, regardless of individual circumstances. Edmund announced that Alexander's abdication was final, and that Prince Marcus would assume the position of heir apparent immediately. He also revealed that comprehensive reforms to royal succession laws would be implemented to prevent future crises of this nature, including provisions for voluntary abdication and modified royal duties. Most surprisingly, Edmund announced that Emma had been offered a position as a special advisor to the royal family on matters affecting rural communities and educational policy. Her background as a teacher and her family's agricultural experience made her uniquely qualified to represent the perspectives of ordinary citizens in royal policy discussions. Emma's acceptance of the advisory position created a solution that no one had anticipated but that satisfied most of the competing interests involved in the crisis. She would remain in contact with Alexander in a professional capacity while pursuing meaningful work that utilized her skills and experience for broader social benefit. Alexander's new role as a private citizen with ongoing connections to the royal family allowed him to maintain some sense of purpose while exploring his individual identity outside the constraints of inherited duty. His relationship with Emma would develop naturally without the pressure of royal protocols or political necessity. Catherine found herself in a paradoxical position of having lost the immediate battle for control over royal family decisions, while potentially gaining greater long-term influence over royal policy through the reforms that would be implemented. The crisis had forced changes that might ultimately strengthen the monarchy's connection to ordinary citizens. The international diplomatic consequences of the crisis were managed through Princess Isabella's continued involvement as a special liaison between Valdonia and Astoria. Her graceful handling of the cancelled engagement actually enhanced her reputation and positioned her for greater leadership roles within her own kingdom. King Edmund's health, which had been deteriorating under the stress of recent events, began to improve as the family crisis resolved, and political uncertainties were addressed through constitutional reforms. The resolution of succession questions and international diplomatic tensions removed many of the pressures that had been affecting his physical condition. The media coverage of the royal crisis evolved from sensational scandal reporting to thoughtful analysis of modern monarchies' adaptation to changing social values. Alexander's abdication was ultimately seen as evidence of the royal family's humanity rather than a sign of institutional weakness. Emma's family found their lives permanently changed but generally improved by their connection to the royal crisis. Her father's farm became financially stable through legitimate agricultural development programs rather than mysterious foreign investment, and her sister Sarah was offered a position in the royal legal department. The foreign intelligence operations that had sought to exploit the royal scandal found their efforts neutralized by the crisis's public resolution and the implementation of enhanced security protocols. Emma's value as an intelligence asset disappeared when her relationship with the royal family became official and transparent. 6 months later, Alexander and Emma's relationship had evolved into a genuine partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and common interests in social justice and educational reform. Their love story, which had begun with deception and nearly ended in tragedy, had become a foundation for meaningful work that benefited the entire kingdom. Prince Marcus proved to be an effective heir apparent who brought fresh perspectives to royal duties while maintaining the stability and continuity that political institutions required. His engagement to a diplomat from a neighboring kingdom was announced with full transparency and mutual enthusiasm from both parties. Catherine adapted to her modified role within the royal family hierarchy by focusing on the constitutional reforms and modernization efforts that emerged from the crisis. Her political skills and understanding of international relations made her valuable in implementing the changes needed to prevent future succession crises. The ancient stones of Ravenscroft Palace had witnessed another chapter in the ongoing evolution of monarchy, democracy, and human relationships that continued to shape Valdonian society. The crisis that had threatened to destroy both personal happiness and political stability had ultimately strengthened both through the courage of individuals who chose honesty over convenience and love over power. Emma and Alexander's story became part of royal family legend, remembered not as a scandal that nearly brought down the monarchy, but as evidence that even inherited institutions could adapt to honor both duty and individual human dignity. Their love had survived deception, political manipulation, international intrigue, and the weight of centuries-old traditions to become something stronger and more valuable than either had originally imagined possible.